for Department. I'm going to start over. I'm Babs Tierno. I'm working for Department of Disability and Aging, which is our new name as of July. I actually work in our Tennessee Strong Families program, which focuses on kids who are in state custody, who also have an intellectual developmental disability. But I was tapped to help do this presentation today, and I am glad to be here. So I'll pass it off to Ashton.
Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. I am Ashton Hooper. I am the clinical director for a program through DDA that is offered called TNCO. And we are a crisis prevention and intervention service for people with mental health needs and intellectual disabilities. So I'm also very excited to be here with you guys this afternoon to speak about autism.
And hi, my name is Carrie Donarajan. I'm the director of 10 Start and echo Ashton's excitement about being here with you guys and getting to share about what we do and autism and intellectual disabilities. Thank you.
I also spy Seth here. Seth, did you want to introduce yourself or no?
Sure. Hey everybody, I'm Seth Wilson. I'm an attorney with DDA. I also work with the Council on Autism Spectrum Disorder.
Yeah, that's what I smelled.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you so much.
Didn't mean to put you on the spot, Seth, but I saw you there, so I thought I would.
All good, thanks.
Okay, so we have put together this PowerPoint presentation, a collaborative effort between Ashton, Carrie, and myself, and hopefully this addresses the kind of things that you guys were looking for and wanting to learn more about. So I'll cover the first few slides, and then Ashton will take it over from a clinical perspective for the second half of the presentation. Oh, you guys changed it. It was Lunch and Learn when we first got the request. All right, let's switch. No. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about intellectual and developmental disabilities and including autism. So we'll take a broad perspective and then work down to talk about autism specifically and then common interventions and strategies for you all. And then working on supports and resources that are available. So intellectual and developmental disabilities. We want to go over this from a very broad perspective at first. You guys are over there. Focusing on how somebody even meets the criteria to be identified with an intellectual or developmental disability. And so you can see on the screen, we have this little, infographic. So everybody with an intellectual disability would also have a developmental disability. So the developmental disability is a federal statute that defines what a developmental disability looks like. So it must occur prior to the age of 22, and then it has functional limitations associated with it. Within that criteria, intellectual disability is a Tennessee state statute that defines that within our state of what that looks like and how someone can qualify. So within Tennessee, there may be as many as like 130,000 individuals. Silent. Shannon, will you mute yourself? Sorry. There may be as many as 130,000 people with intellectual developmental disabilities within the state of Tennessee. Most of them live productive lives. They're very typical, living independently in the community, just like all of us. They have hopes and dreams. They want to be productive. And sorry, I have to move you guys out of the way. All right, so developmental disabilities can look different in a lot of different ways. They may be solely physical, they may be solely neurological, there may be a combination of both. So you may interact with a person who has a developmental disability, and you may not ever even understand or know that that person is dealing with a developmental disability. And a person may have both an intellectual disability and a neurodevelopmental disorder and qualify for both portions of that to meet the definition within our statute. Okay, so what is autism? Autism specifically, in 2013, the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, put together a new definition for autism. It changed the way that we talk about autism. Autism went from 5 or 6 individual diagnoses within the DSM to now an umbrella classification where everything that was separately defined as a neurological or neurodevelopmental disorder within the DSM now falls under the spectrum, autism spectrum disorder criteria. So it's an umbrella. And underneath that, you'll see some of the names that we used to refer to independently, like Asperger's syndrome, Rett syndrome, childhood disorder. Those types of things, or PDD NOS is a common one that predates this change to the DSM. So within the diagnostic criteria, nothing has changed, but how we talk about it changed in 2013. So when you're talking to an adult who has, something like Asperger's syndrome, they may refer to it as Asperger's syndrome because that's what they were diagnosed with. But now you would see that diagnosis exist underneath the autism spectrum disorder umbrella. So in 2013, when they moved these diagnoses all under one umbrella, they also changed the level of severity for autism, which is how much caregiver support is required at any given time. And so you'll hear someone say, my child was diagnosed autism level 2. What does that actually mean? And so I put together this slide to try to explain what that actually means and looks like. And it's related to, it's not the child that we're rating. It's the amount of caregiver support required for that child to live their life. And so a level 1 would be required support. This is the lowest level of support a person would need in order for them to engage in their daily life, all the way up to a level 3, which is substantial support. And so in this situation, the child would be unable to regulate independently and largely unable to communicate in a daily life setting and require significant, substantial amount of support in order to engage with their community. So what is autism? Research indicates that autism has genetic influences and environmental influences. We often see in a situation where one child is diagnosed within the home that another child may also exhibit symptoms that may or may not rise to the level of a diagnosis within that, additional child as well. It's a developmental disorder that presents a lifetime of challenges for the individual that grow and change. And as they master a skill set or a communication strategy or a regulation strategy for a period of time, as they learn, grow, change, and mature, those challenges then grow and mature alongside them. So there's new challenges all the time, just like you or I. Anytime we're in a new situation, learning to navigate that situation can be difficult and challenging. Per the CDC estimate, this is April of 2023, autism is now experienced at a rate of 1 in 36 individuals, with that being a little bit higher in boys than girls. And that's for a lot of reasons that are largely related to diagnosis and not necessarily related to gender differences. All right, so the DSM-5 talks about persistent deficits in several different capacities. So we have social emotional reciprocities. That's your conversation skills, your sharing of emotions and interests. This is your shared interaction with another individual, is where you see a lot of deficits with individuals on the spectrum. You may also see deficits in nonverbal communication, so lack of eye contact, fleeting eye contact, lack of gesturing, over gesturing, and then either a high level of expression or maybe no expression at all. And there's a mix within all of this. So you may have a person who struggles with eye contact, but in all other ways, you would not see any social differences. And then also deficits in developing and maintaining and understanding relationships and the nuances of relationships. Typically, we do see anxiety and sensory differences as well, but they're not criteria of an autism diagnosis, but they are almost always present. And then this phrase is just commonly, I think it's attributed to, I can't remember. But if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. It presents differently in every single person that you encounter with an autism diagnosis. I joke with my children, I have one that is like vanilla ice cream flavored autism. It is everything you would expect to see. He is the Big Bang Theory. I can't remember the main character, but just very quintessential autism diagnosis. And then my youngest, I call him like the Rocky Road version. It's like you got mixed nuts in there. You got some stuff that you weren't expecting. It's just one exciting surprise after another. So every person that you meet on the spectrum is going to present differently, have different challenges. And then autism is just a portion of who they are as a person. And so focusing largely on their character and their, personality as a whole and how that impacts their autism manifestation. So to talk more specifically about the clinical side of this and where you guys can all step up to become a better communicator and supporter of individuals on the spectrum. I have Ashton here because she is the expert in the room on this stuff. So I'm going to turn it over to her and mute myself. And Ashton, just let me know when I need to switch slides.
Thank you, Babs. I will. So here on this slide, we have a few more indicators that touch on the things Babs was just speaking to. Down the middle of the graphic, you see some of the most common characteristics that we see in the population of individuals with autism. But just like Babs was saying, right, each of these items is not necessarily true for each individual. These are just commonalities. So right down the middle, you do see that sensitivity to chaos, environmental challenges, or being touched. And I always like to add here that the chaos and changes can be as subtle to an extent that neurotypicals might not even notice them. But someone on the spectrum is going to have more sensitivity to those things and might be greater impacted by them. The eye contact note here that Babs touched on, that is a common characteristic, but again, not always true for every individual. Difficulty with transitions or adapting to changes in circumstances. This can apply to environmental changes. It can apply to, leaving the home and going into the community, a different staff person showing up for the day than what was anticipated. The usual item they eat for breakfast not being available. It can be something really small and unexpected, but that can still be a significant, challenge for someone in the moment with this diagnosis. Additionally, people with autism do have more difficulty managing and regulating their own emotions. They might often need additional supports or, intentional skills training around coping skills to be able to self-regulate better. And there are a lot of executive functioning impacts that we'll get to in a little bit. But executive functioning really impacts the ability to, formulate and carry out a plan. If you have executive functioning deficits, you might have a hard time prioritizing. It doesn't necessarily mean that someone with autism doesn't have goals they want to strive for, or, things out of life that they want, but sometimes they might need support in what steps are, needed to be taken to be able to achieve those things, especially over what is likely a long period of time, working towards that goal. The two arrows to each side just show kind of different ways that autism can impact. In some conditions, we see autism leading to, higher performance in some areas, and that's listed over here on the right. They perform, above average or exceptional in ranges of intelligence. I have a family member with autism who can spout off every statistic about every baseball player who has ever played in the major leagues, and he just knows it and can just do it on demand. So, they can still be exceptionally skilled in areas of memory or, understanding of things, especially if it's something they take a particular interest in. Additionally, even those who might perform with higher rates of intelligence, we do still often see some of those social cues and social interactions still being a challenge. This does not mean that someone with autism doesn't necessarily want to be social or to, form meaningful relationships with others. Sometimes there's just a lot of nuance and unspoken communication that can be difficult for someone with autism to pick up on, and kind of what we call read between the lines or make an inference. That can be really challenging for someone on the spectrum. And also, I just wanted to note on this side, autism is considered or can be considered that developmental disability piece, and that's listed there. On to the left, we have a little more areas of significant impact or deficit. So, someone with autism might perform really poorly on an academic or intelligence test. They might, need additional time or supports in learning new academic information or skills. They do tend to have greater difficulty with communication. This does not mean necessarily that, someone who cannot speak easily, verbally communicate doesn't necessarily reflect a lack of understanding receptively, but we'll talk a little more about communication in a minute. But there do tend to be more challenges to communication with the greater impact. Also, with the more significant impact, we do see typically a higher rate of that stereotypy and, kind of atypical behavior, things we call stimming, things like that. And with that more significant impact, we often see that intellectual and developmental disability piece present within this diagnosis. We can go to the next slide, Babs. Thank you. So we talked about executive functioning a little bit. I'm going to get a little more into the details of it because it is a big part of how these challenges can present. So anytime there is an executive functioning impact, first and foremost, we're going to see a decreased ability in managing one's emotions, like what I said. There will probably need to be a lot of practice and skills training around what different kinds of, self-awareness processes work for the individual, or it might take prompting from a caregiver to recognize when dysregulation is coming. Stimming is another piece of executive functioning because it can be a tool that is used for emotional regulation. It is a coping skill that helps people manage their sensory input or handle anxious feelings. And I think if a lot of us really reflect, we can probably think of different, times or behaviors that we might engage in if we're feeling a little anxious, that if we're paying attention to ourselves, we take notice of things like tapping a foot or, if you fiddle with your pen, those kinds of things can all be, considered stimming as well. And then dysregulation is a big part of the executive functioning impact, right? So that is whenever a person has challenge in managing the intensity or the duration of their negative emotions, such as fear, sadness, anger, and anxiety. And I think in this field, we've all seen what can happen whenever that dysregulation goes on for long periods of time, and it definitely points to a need for support for that individual. With executive functioning impacts, it also significantly impacts organization and planning. So with that, it can be hard to initiate a task or knowing when is appropriate to start a task and then to maintain that focus until its completion. That is a real organizational skill that this impact, can impact. Additionally, they might struggle with transitions, especially moving from a preferred item or activity to a less preferred or non-preferred item or activity. Again, I think a lot of us, if we look at some of these indicators, that's relatable, right? If I'm in flow with something I'm enjoying, but then I've got this task that I know is waiting for me, it's the motivation to shift gears and go to that thing can be really challenging in the moment to kind of make that shift and get it done. Additionally, people with executive functioning impacts have difficulty with time blindness, meaning they're unaware of how long they've been engaged in something, how much time has passed, how much time they need to allocate to preparation for an upcoming event. It's almost as if, they exist outside of the context of time without those reminders and prompts and supports. And then back to the dysregulation, whenever you hear or think of someone like flipping their lid, or if you hear reference to an emotional thermometer, that is referencing a little more of, being that self-aware, self-reflective, checking in with yourself and understanding where you are in terms of regulation. And if that is something that is difficult for you, if we can move to the next slide, thank you. You can, kind of bottle up and like overflow, I guess is a great way to continue to the analogy. So here we have an emotional thermometer. And so this is a great teaching tool that I have used in community trainings and also with systems that we support in 10 Start, where for a neurotypical individual, often we are checking in with ourselves and we are recognizing our own emotional thermometer. And, you might wake up in the morning and know that you're feeling a certain way. And so on this emotional thermometer, at the start of my day, I might already be a 2 or a 3, like, there's a little bit of irritability, but I can overcome this. I can navigate it. I've got coping skills to get through it, right? But that is an internal process to kind of evaluate where I am on that. And then if something goes wrong through the course of that day, that emotional thermometer might kind of level up and build. And, I think all of us, whenever we're attuned with ourselves, like we can take notice of those things. Like my morning started off hard. There's been a lot more happening throughout the day. I'm starting to feel overwhelmed, but I still have, I still have coping skills that can mitigate where I'm at right now. I can re-regulate. I can take a break if I need to. I can go for a walk, things like that. And then whenever you climb that emotional thermometer, that's more looking into like significant dysregulation and crisis, right? And behavior increases as you move up the emotional thermometer, whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent. But the difference is someone with a neurodivergency, such as autism, they don't always have the ability to check in those mid levels and then self-regulate. Or they might be, hey, my day started great. I'm at a 1, and then one thing happens and it jumps to a 10 because that emotional reactivity is really significant. So you kind of skip that self check in, self re-regulate stage unless there's support there or you have learned skills to be able to check in with yourself and do that. Will you go to the next slide for me, please? Thank you. So sensory processing and disintegration is a big component of the autism diagnosis. Sensory processing refers to one's ability to take in information through the senses. So touch, move, smell, taste, vision, and hearing. Those are the most common senses that we talk about and think about. There are also internal senses that we all experience that, is more about like the way your body feels within itself, how, spatially, you feel comfortable in certain areas, but we'll stay on the big ones for this, the ones we all remember. Touch, move, smell, taste, vision, and hearing, right? The sensory processing is the portion where you take all those senses in, you process, you make sense of them, you organize that information, and then your brain is doing all this work to take that and then make meaningful action or response from it. It is a natural, automatic function of the brain. And with that, all of us, right, we all possess sensory processing and we all seek or avoid certain sensory experiences based upon, how they feel to us when we are experiencing them, right? Like I might seek out a certain type of experience, but then really want to avoid, a chaotic environment like Walmart or the mall on a weekend, knowing there's a chance for a lot of overstimulation between people and crowds and noises and things like that, right? We all do it. We all make decisions around it. And we do that in an attempt to keep our own sensory system in balance. It helps us relieve stress, helps us manage or avoid discomfort, or it helps us access comfort as we need it. Now, a sensory processing and disintegration disorder occurs whenever that functioning is affected in a way that impacts the person's ability to maintain their daily living. So even though we all do it, it only becomes a disorder whenever it gets in the way of the things that you actually, you need to be doing for yourself through your life. In people with a diagnosis of autism, we might see a higher rate of this disintegration, right? And that can lead to hypersensitivity or hyposensitivity to sensory input. So either the hyper would be like I'm hyper aware, overstimulated, like feeling all the things, or the hypo, it can almost have the opposite effect where you're almost unaware or less impacted by some of those sensory components. Thank you. So here, this is just to show, all those senses pieces that we touched on a little bit, but sounds, right? Something that can be so like minor that most of us wouldn't even notice, and our brain might automatically tune out. Like that can actually be something incredibly dysregulating for an individual with autism. When I'm in the community providing these trainings, there's usually a fluorescent light bulb around that I can point to as an example where fluorescent light bulbs, a lot of us may not notice them. But if you have some neurodivergency, you might take notice that they have a hum and a very particular glow. And someone on the spectrum often finds those things to be aversive. I used to be a classroom teacher. I would have to mute and keep those things off all the time because they could be so dysregulating. Additionally, noises that like don't really serve a purpose, they're just kind of noises for noise sake. Those can also contribute to overstimulation. I think of like the keypads when I'm at the gas pump and I'm pushing, my pin to get gas out and it's just beeping at me. Like it doesn't really serve a lot of benefit, but for someone that extra beep that could add up over the course of the day. Excessively loud music, TV, things like that. That can be aversive. You might also see from an individual with autism that they only like to listen to their music very, very loud. Their headphones, you can hear the music through it, even though they're on their ears. That's that hypo kind of contradiction that can happen. With smells, there's a whole lot that can go on to smell. We all have preferences and aversions around smell. There are involuntary responses to particular smells, and someone on the spectrum might have a different level of sensitivity to particular odors, fragrances, or just natural occurring smells from the environment. With texture, we might see certain preferences or avoidances of textures. I've known a number of young children with autism who like refuse to wear pants or jeans. They only, want to wear dresses or shorts because they feel itchy against their skin, even though it's a cotton fabric. They might want to remove all the tags in their clothing or opt for something seamless because that little bit can be, it can just really kind of preoccupy the mind and be a real focus for the individual because it feels, to them differently than the way we might think about it. For taste, right? You might again see preference or seeking out certain textures, flavors, consistencies might be another thing, as opposed to avoiding certain textures, flavors, or things like that because of the way that stimuli, is processed through the brain. Another thing, I don't even know what this last one means. I'm sorry, Babs, we're going to skip this one. Occurrence. I guess what I want to say around this one is that depending on how regulated or dysregulated an individual might be in a moment, their sensitivity might vary. That's my takeaway from that. Do we have sound shared to your
I don't know. Not never used Zoom, but I don't know if this is going to work. We're going to try it. Let me
We're
know
going
if
to try
you
it.
hear it.
So let me set the stage really quick. This is a really, really wonderful video that portrays the sensory experience of this young boy with autism as he's in a mall. If we cannot get the audio to work, we will skip it, but I just want to say this is available on YouTube and I share it in orientation with 10 Start. I share it when I'm training law enforcement around autism. It is a really, really great teaching tool. And you can just Google boy autism mall and it will pop up, but hopefully it'll work because I think it's great.
No. Can you hear it?
I do not hear audio.
Wait, let me see if there's a setting with us.
Yeah. Sorry, I always forget to pre-check the videos.
Me too.
My apologies, y'all.
Hey guys. Often when you go to screen share, when you first do it, there's a space at the top where you can choose share audio.
I just did it.
Okay.
I'm gonna
Thank you.
start it over. Yeah, I didn't think to look up.
7, 8, 9.
Take my hand.
I'm not naughty. I'm autistic. And I just get too much information.
Thank you, Babs. I love sharing this video because I can do my absolute best to describe these things, right? But I don't personally live that experience. I do have days I feel overstimulated. There are certainly certain environments I have more sensitivity to, but that is not my typical experience. It's probably not the typical experience of most of us on this call. So to be able to see this perspective of walking into an environment that to a lot of us can probably feel very familiar, right? There's a lot more, I guess, that is occurring than maybe we take notice of. And I love this video for that reason. Oh, I'll have to look. I will look up the title of the video. I will just say that I have stolen it from YouTube. Like we've borrowed, I should say. We've borrowed it from YouTube because it's a great tool. But I will definitely find that and share that for you. But just to highlight, if this weren't this setting, I'd probably ask for a little more feedback, but I'll just toss it out there. Things that I take notice, right? Number one, the little boy like notices a shoelace untied on an individual. And like that might seem really inconsequential to us, but someone on the spectrum, right? Like they typically see the world as there's a particular order and way for things to be. And if a shoelace is untied, then like that is something out of place. Another thing, right? He's taking notice of all these little sounds like coins falling or fragrances that are being sprayed, the photo booth kind of going off. And again, a lot of things that if we were walking through the space, we might not notice. We might just like our brain just kind of typically filters that out and we can just carry on. But for this little boy, right, you can tell as the video goes on that all this sensory input, he's starting to become a little more dysregulated, right? Like we can hear his breathing increase. And then the part that I always take notice of is he's like counting on his fingers. And that to me, that's a coping skill. This is a boy in an environment where he's feeling some sense of dysregulation. He's trying to reground himself through this counting technique, right? But the sensory input keeps coming and it ends up being more in that moment than what that boy, his skills can match. And so he ends up at the end of the video, having, a behavioral display of, those challenges. And it's all because of these internal processes that no one around him can really take notice of. Even if they're like aware and attuned to it, like his mom, you can tell she was trying to navigate him through it. But even then, it was more than like the moment, more than his skills in the moment could meet. So I always like sharing this video. I encourage you I will get that link for you and you guys can share it, amongst whatever organization or team you're a part of, because I do think it's a really, really valuable perspective of that lived experience. So then we'll get to autism and supports. So in terms of executive functioning, remember that's the part of your brain that's like, it's calling all the shots. It's prioritizing, it's planning, it's organizing, it's making a lot of judgment decisions. But we know someone with autism likely has difficulty in this area, right? Their short-term memory, they might need a lot of reminders, things like that. So with these areas of impact, what we can do is we can understand first and foremost that like this is likely going to be a challenge for the individual. And if we anticipate that challenge, then we can put a plan in to help support the individual through what we anticipate will be challenging, right? So what can this look like? Visual supports are a big thing. I know now in a lot of ways, we're a little more technology based in terms of these supports. I became a licensed teacher at a time that most things were like paper printouts and you're like posting schedules on the wall with Velcro. and all this, but now we're in a new day and era. So that might be something on a tablet that lines out for the individual what their day looks like. It might be something that they can, make choice around throughout their day and schedule building, but it helps them know what is to come. It helps them prepare for transitions. It takes out a lot of the surprise, right? And everyone can be on the same page around what to expect over the course of the day. So calendars, schedules, checklists, these can all be really, really supportive tools for executive functioning. Also, giving someone a reminder or a prompt of what's to come can also be really helpful. Like, oh, don't forget this afternoon, we have to go do that thing. Or tomorrow morning, it's going to look a little different. So, let's make a plan for in the morning because we're going to be out of our usual routine. Things like that, like forewarning around transitions or especially changes as best as we can, right? That can help the individual navigate those changes better. Now, I know sometimes we don't have notice, right? Like life happens. You think a staff person's going to show up, they call out sick. The card, has a flat tire, so you can't get to the appointment. Like things happen, right? But if we anticipate and plan for the things that we can anticipate and plan around, it makes it a little easier to navigate. Enabling technology, I feel like I've already sold it a little bit here, but it is a great, great resource that can help put some of these supports in place. I would also add, this isn't on the slide, but executive functioning and the areas around like transitions and what supports and things might be helpful to someone with autism. A behavior analyst can actually be really helpful with a lot of those things too, in determining which of those tools might be, a good fit for the individual to implement and to put in some structure around that implementation. I also think it's important to take note of as you discover things that like, wow, this person was having a hard time, but they utilized this skill or we approached it this way and actually everything kind of smoothed over. Things got a little better. The individual was able to get through their day, things like that. You want to take note of that and you want to replicate that in the future for, in those areas where you might anticipate some challenges. If you find something that works, keep leaning into it. As far as adaptive functioning, so adaptive functioning is typically difficulty in completing your daily living, like self-care kind of tasks independently. It's a lot of experiential learning and falling in with like the norms of a group and hitting certain like milestones through development, right? And someone with autism probably isn't hitting all of those milestones at the same rate or timeline as someone who is neurotypical. And quite often they might need some level of support in, learning the skill to be able to do these things or working towards being able to do them independently and consistently. So with that, right, resources and supports are to recognize the skills and strengths of the individual, right? We're big preachers in 10 Start around lean into what's strong and not what's wrong, right? If there are skills there that we can build upon, we're gonna start with that. Also, it's a great time to take an interest in, or I guess assess the interest of the individual in which skills to maybe focus on or prioritize first. You definitely want to offer support to complete tasks as they're working towards that independence. I would not automatically assume that everyone needs the same level of support. And, in encouraging independence, we don't always want to, I guess, assert support before they've requested that help, because then we can fall into a pattern, right, of maybe not even pursuing that higher independence. If I know that someone's going to step in and just like do it for me every time, sort of thing, right? So you want to put the learning just a little bit on them, but still be there to give them that support and encouragement and direction. And you also want to utilize those strategies like what we just talked about, like checklists and schedules. BCBAs can make great like task analysis where they break down like one activity into a bunch of little activities in a way that makes, achieving that ultimate goal like feel more feasible. And also it helps you be more aware of progress being made because you are noticing those kind of smaller milestones um, being accomplished and achieved. And you should celebrate success as they're working towards that independence. All right, so communication. As I said, communication for this population, it can look a lot of different ways. That you're going to see mixed levels of ability to verbally communicate. They might utilize other devices or strategies to communicate. They might gesture or sign. Also, there's expressive versus receptive language, right? So maybe vocally, I might not say a lot, but that does not necessarily mean that I don't understand what is being said to me or around me. Like those two things are not always hand in hand. Additionally, someone with autism might have a slower processing of verbal communication, and they might just need a little bit more time to take in and process what is being said before they can translate that into some kind of meaningful action, response, or next step. All right, so your SLP, your speech language pathologist, is going to be a really, really great resource in this area. I will also say a BCBA can help in the areas of like functional communication. But effectively, what you want to do is identify what communication method is going to work for that individual, like what is going to help them best communicate their wants and needs. And at the same time, make it, more, I guess, feasible and more accessible to communicate with that individual, as a caregiver or loved one, a provider, things like that. Enabling technology is a great resource. I mean, we have the advancements in technology just since I've entered this career field. Like it just has like blown my mind around the doors that it has opened. So I definitely think that it is something worth exploring for individuals. Some of the older school tried and true methods still apply too, like a picture exchange might be something an individual, depending on their age, they might have been trained to utilize that to communicate their wants and needs. They might use visual prompts or choice boards in making selections, or like a first then kind of organized activity, like I'm going to do this now and this later. An SLP, a BCBA, enabling technology, they're going to be great resources for you in figuring out what communication strategies are going to best support the individual. Right. And in the area of transitions, I feel like I've touched on this one a little bit, but it doesn't hurt to say it again, right? Like someone with autism is likely going to have difficulty adjusting from one activity, setting, or person to the next, like at their best moments. And then if you consider, am I engaged in a highly preferred activity and transitioning to a lower preferred activity, like that's only going to make that more challenging. And, some activities, settings, and people are just an aversive experience. Like we can be honest. I've hated going to the dentist my entire life. It doesn't stop me from going. However, it's still an aversive experience, right? So we can all relate to, there are some things that we have to do that maybe we don't want to do. We can only avoid it so long. We have to go through it, right? So what resources exist when it's those transitions that we have to do, even if we don't want to? Once again, I feel like I'm just plugging BCBAs because I am one, but also they are great resources in this area. BCBAs and RBTs can really help develop and roll out these plans around transitions between people, between environments, between settings, things like that. They can also, you can also help identify ways to prepare the individual for what to expect, those changes that might come up. Utilize those communication tools we talked about, like the schedule, the calendar, and things. Timers are a great, strategy to help someone prepare for, hey, we're doing this activity now, but in 10 minutes, we've got to make this switch. And, I've gone as far to like visually display that timer. So there's a nice little countdown that's happening. So it's no surprise to anyone, especially when you consider that time blindness that can occur with executive functioning deficits, right? I can look up, see the timer is going down, and then we're all on the same page that like as that time comes to an end, so does the activity. And again, we want to really support and encourage and like strength spot, as we call it in 10 Start, or praise an individual for making, those adjustments, transitioning from one activity to the rest. That doesn't mean, right, we have to necessarily make a big show out of it, but, gratitude, recognition, things like that go a really long way with people. Right? So in summary, what can we do to help support individuals with autism? We can definitely begin by recognizing appropriate regulating sensory inputs that, that are helpful to the individual, and make those resources available to the individual. There are a lot of things that exist out there that sometimes we just need to get in the hands of the people we support. We can also be proactive in anticipating areas that might be challenging because of that self-regulation component. And we can make intentional plans around that. So we're working proactively instead of reacting to whatever, comes from our poorly laid plans, right? A big piece here is like consistency across people, across environments. So information sharing and, consistent responding across all members of an individual's like system or circle is really, really key, because that consistency piece is going to be a huge part of the support of the individual with autism, because they like that structure and predictability, right? So if we're all on the same page, it makes it easier to be on the same page. If we know an individual with autism is likely going to have executive functioning challenges, we can anticipate those challenges as well, right? I'm a list maker. I make one every day. You can make one in the home for the individual or with the individual, guide them in what that might look like, and they can eventually do it for themselves, things like that. And ultimately, we want to be a community bridge to other resources. No one person can do all the different components of what is required to support an individual. So there are a lot of resources out there that exist, and we want to point the individuals we're supporting in those directions and help, facilitate access to that. So putting in a referral to a behavior analyst, contacting, the enabling technology department for an assessment, or, getting an SLP involved so communication can be approved. All of these things, it's just bringing the pieces together. So with that, I think we're at the end. Do we have any questions from the group? No? Well, while I'll still have you, I'm going to try to pull this YouTube link real quick so I can put it in the chat. And then I think that's it. Yeah.
I think there's a link to the video in the PowerPoint presentation if you want me to.
Oh, and we can send that out. That would be great.
Actually, I can do it right now. I'm gonna stop sharing and go get it out of the presentation.
I have the link too, if whichever way we want to. I just realized I muted myself and not my player, and I apologize. The video is called "Can You Make It to the End?" which I always think is a funny a funny title, but I'm gonna add it to the chat right now. If Babs didn't beat me to it.
I didn't beat you to it. Perfect.
She usually does. So y'all caught me at a good moment. So there it is. I will say we can send out these slides. My contact information is at the end. So is Babs, and so is my program director, Carrie Donarajan. I just want to really quickly plug 10 Start. If you know an individual who struggles with some of these areas and it results in crisis, we might be a good fit for that individual. And our website has a referral information. Please send them our way. So thanks.
And I don't work for enabling technology, but we are enabling technology. We talked about that several times, so I do want to plug them as well, because they have some amazing creative solutions to a lot of different executive functioning and adaptive functioning skill set deficits, and they do incredible work. It looks like a lot of fun. So yeah, check them out as well.
Definitely. Please reach out if you have any questions or anything, but we appreciate your time today. Pilar, I'm going to give it back to you. Oh, is that
this is
Carrie?
Carrie from the Ether. Will you put the 10 Start website in the chat as well? So, and if people have questions about that, they can reach out to us.
Absolutely. Because we would love for y'all to. And there we go.
Well, thank you so much, ladies, for your wonderful presentation. It was incredibly informative. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this recording. I'm going to stop in just a moment, and I'm going to put it on the unlisted link on YouTube, so that way all our members will only have access to it. So you guys will have access to that video. And once those slides are sent, I'll send them along with the URL for their website. Thank you so much again. And we can end the presentation here. Have a wonderful day and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.